if you can go on to your website, the Home Affairs, there's a bulletin or a list of critical and scarce skills in the country, right? And this is worldwide. One of the biggest skill that is being sought after by the market is the skill of critical thinking.
Hello, grade 12s. Thank you so much for the attention, support, and encouragement you show through your likes, shares, and subscriptions. I truly appreciate each one of you. I noticed in the analytics that many of those watching the videos are new visitors who haven't yet subscribed or liked the content. If you're finding value in these videos, may I kindly ask for your support by subscribing, liking, and sharing the videos with others who might benefit from them? And please consider turning on the notification bell so that you're the first to know when a new video is released. Thank you again for being here. I couldn't do this without you. In this video, we will explore the Cuban Missile Crisis, a key episode in the Cold War between the United States and the USSR. During the Cold War, both superpowers sought to expand their influence globally while trying to counter the other's efforts. This competition reached many parts of the world, including Latin America, where the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the United States and the USSR to the brink of war. Key concepts: containment and brinkmanship. Containment was a policy adopted by the United States aimed at preventing the spread of communism worldwide. This meant opposing or limiting the USSR's influence, especially in areas close to US interests. The US often intervened diplomatically, economically, or even militarily to prevent countries from adopting communism, seeing it as a direct threat to democratic ideals. Brinkmanship is a tactic used during the Cold War in which both superpowers would push each other to the edge of open conflict without actually starting a war. It involved taking extreme risks to see which side would back down first. This tactic was risky and dangerous, as it increased the chance of an accidental war. Key players: Kennedy, Khrushchev, and Castro. President John F. Kennedy was the young, charismatic US leader known for his commitment to containing communism and protecting US interests. Although he had only been president since 1961, Kennedy was already tested by crises such as the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, which deepened tensions with Cuba and the USSR. Nikita Khrushchev was the USSR's premier, determined to spread socialism and defend Soviet influence against American power. Known for his bold approach, Khrushchev sought to demonstrate the USSR's strength in the Cold War and protect Cuba as a communist ally. Fidel Castro was the leader of the Cuban Revolution, which overthrew Batista's regime in 1959. Initially popular among Cubans for his promises of economic equality, Castro implemented socialist reforms that angered the United States, especially when he seized control of American-owned assets in Cuba. What led to the establishment of a communist Cuba? Cuba, an island just 160 kilometers off the coast of the United States, was once heavily influenced by American business and political interests. American companies controlled a significant portion of Cuba's economy, including oil refineries, mines, and large industries, while many Cubans lived in poverty. In 1952, a dictator named Batista seized power. The United States had long supported Fulgencio Batista because he was anti-communist, which aligned with U.S. goals to prevent the spread of communism in Latin America. Batista also allowed U.S. companies significant control over Cuban industries, keeping the Cuban economy tied to American interests. However, many Cubans opposed Batista's government, including Fidel Castro, who led a group of revolutionaries to overthrow Batista in 1959. After taking power, Castro introduced socialist reforms, nationalizing large industries and redistributing wealth, which affected American investments. Suspicious of Castro's intentions, the U.S. became increasingly hostile, especially when Castro sought economic and diplomatic support from the USSR, the leading communist power. This marked the start of a communist Cuba, with close ties to the USSR. As tensions grew, the US attempted to overthrow Castro's government, which led to the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961. Cuban exiles, trained and supported by the CIA, attempted to land on Cuban shores and spark an uprising, but they were quickly defeated. This event embarrassed the US, further strained relations, and pushed Castro closer to the USSR. In October 1962, the US learned of Soviet missile installations in Cuba. This discovery was made by high-altitude U-2 spy planes, designed to fly at extreme altitudes, higher than commercial aircraft and equipped with powerful cameras to capture detailed images. The U-2 planes captured photographs revealing missile bases capable of launching nuclear weapons that could strike most major US cities within minutes. This alarming evidence set off a rapid escalation, with US leaders debating how to respond to the immediate threat. The USSR justified these missile installations as a way to balance the US presence of missiles in Turkey close to Soviet borders. In October 1962, an American spy plane discovered these missile sites, alarming US officials. With Soviet missiles in Cuba, major American cities were suddenly in range of a nuclear attack. This discovery escalated the conflict to a critical level. Faced with this crisis, President Kennedy's administration considered several options. Advisors debated launching an airstrike to destroy the missile sites or even invading Cuba to overthrow Castro. However, both options risked provoking a direct war with the Soviet Union. Instead, Kennedy chose a more cautious yet firm approach, a quarantine or naval blockade, to prevent further Soviet missiles and supplies from reaching Cuba. By using the term quarantine rather than blockade, which is a formal act of war, Kennedy framed the move as a defensive measure. This allowed the US to enforce its will without appearing as the aggressor. The historic Kennedy-Khrushchev exchange. Kennedy and Khrushchev engaged in a tense exchange, each using brinkmanship to push the other to the limit without initiating a full-scale conflict. On October 22, Kennedy addressed the American public on television, revealing the Soviet missile threat in Cuba and pledging to protect the US by any means necessary. He issued an ultimatum. Any Soviet ship attempting to cross the quarantine line would be stopped, and if it resisted, it would be fired upon. Khrushchev responded defiantly, condemning the quarantine as a hostile act and warning the US that Soviet ships would not back down. The two leaders communicated through letters, each attempting to convince the other to de-escalate while maintaining a strong position. In a particularly tense exchange, Khrushchev insisted that any attack on Cuba would be seen as an act of war, hinting at potential retaliation. This intense diplomatic standoff continued until October 26th, when Khrushchev sent a letter suggesting a way out.
The USSR would remove its missiles from Cuba if the US promised not to invade Cuba.
The next day, a more formal letter arrived, adding a new demand. The US must also remove its missiles from Turkey, which were positioned close to Soviet borders. In a secret meeting, Attorney General Robert Kennedy told Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin that the US intended to remove the Turkish missiles but couldn't do so publicly, as it might upset NATO allies. This private assurance finally led to a deal that ended the standoff. The resolution and its impact on the Cold War. On October 28th, the world breathed a sigh of relief as Khrushchev publicly agreed to withdraw the Soviet missiles from Cuba, and Kennedy secretly agreed to remove the US missiles from Turkey. To avoid future miscommunications, they established a direct hotline between the White House and the Kremlin. The crisis also led to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which aimed to reduce nuclear weapons testing. The Nuclear Weapons Test Ban Treaty and a hotline for future crises. In the aftermath of the crisis, both superpowers recognized the need to reduce the threat of nuclear war. This led to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, an agreement to halt nuclear weapons testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. Additionally, the US and USSR established a hotline between Washington and Moscow to allow direct communication in future emergencies, so that leaders could negotiate in real time and avoid the delays that had added tension during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Aftermath for the key players. The Cuban Missile Crisis left lasting marks on the key players. Kennedy emerged from the crisis as a hero in the United States, his popularity soaring for his handling of the standoff. Unfortunately, he was assassinated in November 1963, but his legacy included his handling of the crisis as a moment of strong and effective leadership. Khrushchev, however, faced backlash at home. Although he avoided war, his decision to remove the missiles from Cuba was seen as a retreat, leading to a loss of prestige in the Soviet Union. In 1964, he was removed from power and spent the rest of his life in relative obscurity. Castro remained in power for decades, though the outcome of the crisis placed limits on his relationship with the USSR. Although he lost the direct Soviet military presence, he continued to receive economic and ideological support from the USSR, solidifying Cuba's place
as a socialist state.
The Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point in the Cold War, reminding both superpowers of the devastating potential of nuclear weapons and leading to a cautious approach in future conflicts. This high-stakes episode is a powerful example of how close the world came to nuclear war and the importance of diplomacy, restraint, and strategic leadership in resolving international crises. In summary, the Cuban Missile Crisis exemplified the policies of containment and brinkmanship. The US tried to contain communism close to its borders, while both superpowers pushed each other to the brink. Although the world came close to a devastating war, diplomatic negotiation ultimately prevailed, leading to a temporary easing of Cold War tensions. Thank you for watching. If you learned something, please consider sharing the video with a friend. If you want to support what the classroom does, please consider supporting the classroom by donating a small amount of your choosing through the Zapper and SnapScan link on your screen. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out.